Hello to all my Diversity Matters subscribers. My name is Oscar Holmes IV, and I really appreciate your support. And to show you how much I appreciate your support, as a Diversity Matters subscriber, you get exclusive access to listen to Beyond the Mill, my live diversity dialogues talk show that I created and host on campus at Rutgers University-Camden. Now, because it's a live show and recorded using a different system, the audio quality isn't as consistent at times, but I promise you, the guests and content are great and you'll love the show. Plus, if you're ever in the area, please join us to be a part of our live audience so that you can enjoy, listen, learn, network, and ask our guests questions in real time. Enjoy the show.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is so good to be here. This is our first episode for 2020, but it's actually the fourth episode of season 2. So my name is Oscar Holmes IV, and I welcome all of you to this episode of Beyond the Mill. I am so excited to have my wonderful colleagues and guests for this episode. In case you live under a rock, you may not know that it's Black History Month. So for Beyond the Mill, every February, we celebrate Black History Month with the episode, The African Diasporic Experience. So today we have two wonderful people, great friends of mine, great colleagues. I'm so glad that they agreed to be here on the show. So to my far right, we have Ms. Rhasheda Douglas, Esquire. She is the Assistant Dean for Minority Student Programs at Rutgers Law School here. And then to my near right, we have Dr. Keith Green, who is an Associate Professor of English, as well as the Director of Africana Studies Program here at Rutgers Camden. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being in the guest chair, the hot seat. And thank you for all of you for attending this episode. So if you haven't been to one before, a question that I like to start with is...
We're just working out the mic. Okay. Thank you.
What brought you here to Rutgers, and where can people find you?
Do you want me to start?
Sure, you can start.
Okay. Well, I actually attended Rutgers Law School and graduated in 2002. And after leaving the law school, I actually started with a firm in Philadelphia practicing commercial litigation, which was a great opportunity for me to learn how to litigate, but it didn't fulfill my passion. And so I left the law firm after 5 years and was fortunate to actually secure a position with the U.S. Department of Education with their Office for Civil Rights, investigating discrimination complaints on the basis of race, sex, disability status, and age. And I was there with the agency for about 8 years and decided that I wanted to be on a campus because with OCR in that role, we actually formulated guidance for universities to follow regarding sexual assault, race discrimination, harassment, and we received the complaints, and that was my job to investigate them. But I was more interested in finding out, how do you reach out to students to help them understand what their rights are, the obligations of the institution, and then just wanting to focus more on developing a culture that actually prevents those types of incidents from happening in the first place. So I was more interested in trying to be proactive and help out with students and communities with developing cultures that, just embrace diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And so I saw a position available at Rowan, stayed with Rowan for about a year, handling sexual assault investigations specifically, and then learned that the Minority Student Program was coming here to Rutgers Law School. The program actually started over 50 years ago at Rutgers in Newark, and when the two law schools merged, they decided they wanted it here in Camden. And I thought it was a blessing to have here on campus because it just helps to provide additional support for students that are underrepresented in the profession. And so when I saw that program was here, having a chance to get back to my alma mater, having a chance to help support the careers of other attorneys of color, LGBT attorneys, students that are first in their families to go to law school, I jumped at the opportunity. So that's what brought me back to Rutgers. And you can find me in the law school building.
Great. So just want to clarify, does your program support students here at Camden and Newark, or does Newark also have an office up there as well?
Newark has an office there as well.
Okay, gotcha. So, Keith.
All right. So, well, first of all, thank you for having us, and I appreciate being here with you today. So in some sense, my story is similar to Rhasheda's. I never left Rutgers in a way. So I'm from Jamaica. I'm sure you can tell by my strong, deep Jamaican accent, right? But I came to the U.S. in 1987 when I was 11 years old. And I went to a school called St. Bart's, which is now where the Boys and Girls Club is in Camden, across from where used to be Camden High. Lots of things have changed. And I went to Camden High School, right? So in a lot of ways, I feel like I'm from Camden. I remember my teachers at Camden High, such as Betty Hankins and Coach Thames. And from there, I went on to Morehouse and did my graduate work at the University of Michigan. I left Michigan in about 2001 and kept on writing from New Jersey. So the place in which I actually finished my thesis and dissertation was actually the Paul Robeson Library. So this is actually in lots of ways home for me. So in 2007, roughly in the fall when I finished my PhD, I saw an ad for a job, and the job was actually Rutgers-Camden, looking for an English professor. And I literally just finished my degree months before. So it was a no-brainer. And I applied and was very successful and ended up being able to come back home, home in a way. You can find me in Armitage 462 during my office hours. So students don't show up until it's too late. So you can visit me whenever you like. I'll be there.
And these are really cool people to visit as well. So definitely take them up on that offer. So we are celebrating Black History Month, and I always like to start with asking both of you, what are some poignant memories that you have that you lived through Black history, and some things that stick out that you're particularly proud of, and perhaps maybe some ways that you contributed to Black history yourself?
Well, lived through Black history. The thing that, of course, comes to mind for me is seeing Barack Obama be elected president, and just remembering distinctly where I was when they announced that he won the election, and just crying like almost uncontrollably at that moment, just disbelief that it actually occurred. And so that's something I'm so thankful that when I was with the federal government, I can officially say Barack Obama was my boss. And it was something, even coming into work after the election happened, and my regional director had this beautiful t-shirt that she turned into a picture because she was so excited to get it up on the wall. And that was in the lobby when we came into work every day. And as I mentioned, it was with the Office for Civil Rights, and we were at that time just really, I think, focused on making sure that civil rights were enforced. There was a lot of guidance that was issued by my agency at that time to help with Title IX, Title VI, and a lot of that guidance has now been repealed or redacted by the agency, unfortunately. I just was reading something the other day about rights that are being stripped away under Title VI, specifically, and Title IX as well, and it breaks my heart, but I'm still hopeful and optimistic that we will get back the swing of where it needs to be. But let me see, what was the question exactly? I just got, the other thing that I lived through that I can say what inspired me actually to pursue law in the first place, I was watching the documentary Eyes on the Prize. When I was in elementary school, it was a big treat to watch a video for the day. And, we went to the library and you see the TV coming in, we're like, yes, no lesson, we get a chance to watch this movie. And I remember seeing Eyes on the Prize, and there were segments about Thurgood Marshall and, of course, Dr. King, and I can remember distinctly almost forgetting everyone else in the room and just hearing my heartbeat, because I was so just engaged with what they were doing and how they were able to change this country through the law. And so from that moment, in probably the 5th or 6th grade, I thought, wow, I want to help change the world. I want to help improve, access to education, to make sure people aren't discriminated against because of housing or because of, their national origin. And so watching that documentary definitely was just significant in my life. So that's a part of Black history that helped shape my dreams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for me, and I was the year I started at Rutgers-Camden, actually the same year that Barack Obama was elected. So I always felt like we came in at the same time. I wish he could have stayed as long as I've been here, but that's another world. So in terms of memorable kind of Black history moments that I've lived through, I believe it was 1990, and I was spending the summer with my aunt in New York, and that was the same summer in which, or same year in which Nelson Mandela, right, was released, right, from prison in South Africa, and he did a North American tour, and he came to New York, and so the amount of people that showed up for that particular parade was incredible. We were standing so far back I could barely see him. But I remember him being there, and the crowd started to do a call and response. And he said from the very top of where he was, Amandla, right? And we responded a way to, which simply means, right, power, right, to the people. I remember for about 25 minutes we just kept on shouting Amandla, right? And they would respond a way to. And so seeing Nelson Mandela, although barely honestly, right, but seeing him from afar in New York City, his first time in the U.S. since, for being 27 years, right, in imprisonment under apartheid in South Africa, that was really powerful. Although I don't think about it often, I know that it definitely kind of shaped who I am and what I care about. So that was a really special moment for me as well.
Sure. So, Rhasheda, you brought up the movie The Eyes on the Prize. So there's a movie that just came out that also deals with the law that is getting a lot of attention. And I would say it's my favorite book, Just Mercy, written by Brian Stevenson. And we in the School of Business was fortunate to have Brian Stevenson as our commencement speaker a few years ago. So I was able to talk to him and get a picture with him. And he's like an idol to me in a sense. If you haven't read the book, Just Mercy, I encourage you to pick it up. I literally was crying like every other page. That's how powerful his writing is. But the law students here had opportunity to go as a group to see Just Mercy. So I wanted to get your thoughts about that experience as well. Keith, if you had opportunity to see it as well, or your thoughts about Brian Stevenson or the book or just the content of the movie or book.
Well, thank you, because had you not introduced us to Mr. Harmon, that opportunity would not have been afforded to the law school. So thank you for doing that. We had about, I'd say maybe 40-something odd students that came out. I mean, it was a quick turnaround to get the movie promoted, to get law students there. And the movie itself, yes, absolutely powerful, just in terms of trying to speak truth to power. The criminal justice system in itself is so corrupt, in my opinion. And I feel like it preys on people of color, people of low income backgrounds. So watching that movie, the scene that really struck me was when he was coming in for his attorney visit the first time. And they required him to strip and be subjected to a search. And the moderator that we had after asked if everyone in the audience thinks they would do that in order to, gain access to their clients. And I just thought, it's horrible that has to be, or was a choice that he was even presented with. But he kept his cool. He is an amazing pioneer in so many ways with criminal justice reform and what the Equal Justice Initiative is doing here in this country. And so the movie itself, it was great to have the students there. We had students that were also from the criminal justice major, the criminal justice department. So we had a really diverse audience. We had some students that also were in the social work department that I later found out. But it's phenomenal to do something like that as a community, because then you get a chance to just kind of digest some of those emotions and talk about what we can each be doing to help. And that's what I thought of that movie. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
So I haven't seen the film, but I did get a chance to actually hear Brian Stevenson speak when he was here as commencement speaker. And for me, he was, of all the speakers I've seen since I've been at Rutgers Camden, whether for commencement or something else, the most impactful. I think half of the graduating class might have been in tears as well in terms of speaking to the issue of criminal justice. And it really is, the point that I like about in terms of Just Mercy as the book as well as his work, is that, racism and inequality in the law is a structural problem. And so I get really kind of frustrated sometimes when folks talk about kind of individuals which is part of the issue as well, kind of doing better and knowing their rights and working harder, which is part of it. I mean, we're all here because we believe in hard work and doing the right thing, but there are also structural issues which prevents, large blocks of people, right, from doing well. And so what I really carry away from his work and his writing is that we have to kind of change the structure, right? People say, and kind of informally, don't hate the player, hate the game. And that's what we're fighting against, right? Not simply individual people, right, but larger structures which control and shape all of us.
Thank you. So again, if this is your first time to be on the Mill, this is an interactive conversation. So I give you an opportunity to ask our guests questions as well. So I'm going to ask you one more question to give you all some time to think about yours, and then we're going to come back to you, okay? So that's your time to think. So we talked about criminal justice, and that's a heavy topic. But before I give them time to chime in, I just want to leave this question with you on a lighter topic. So, what is something that you love about Black culture? Because there's a lot of things, right? It's heavy. We can talk about a lot of heavy issues, racism, right, criminal justice, but that's so many things to love too, right? So let's lead us off with sharing some things that you love about Black culture, and that'll give you some opportunities to come up with your questions.
It's funny because Keith, I was just actually telling Keith that for high school, I was born and raised, I didn't mention this earlier, in Newark, New Jersey, which is a predominantly African-American city. Up the turnpike. And for high school, I had the opportunity to go away to a boarding school. And I initially thought it was a great idea. I thought it was going to be like Facts of Life. For those, I know a lot of you don't know what Facts of Life is, but it was a TV show. And it was a mother, a dorm mother, and they had the one Black girl that came in with the roller skates. And I was like, this is going to be fun. I'm going to be making cookies. And yeah, I thought I was going to be Tootie.
Right.
And had a chance to get a scholarship to go away to a boarding school in Washington, Connecticut, in the middle of nowhere. There was one Black family in the entire town. And the father of the family worked for the school, like in the boiler room, maintenance, different things like that around campus. So for me, it was culture shock 101. Leaving Newark, and I think the majority, I didn't have many white peers that were in my classroom. So there might have been one white student or two in the entire school. So to go to Washington, Connecticut, where I would be sometimes the only person of color in the classroom with maybe 20 other students, it was a culture shock for me. And I honestly, I feel like it was a growth opportunity for me as well, because oftentimes I would tell my father that I didn't want to be there anymore at the boarding school, because it was their first experience as well. Some of the white students that were there, they were from affluent areas. Parents had money, and when I say money, I mean like Kellogg money, owned divisions of Coors, Molson beers, like they sent their children to this boarding school. So it was a lot of old money, as they say. And so in some of those communities, they're not diverse. They don't get a chance to engage with students of different races or nationalities. So this was an experiment for all of us in a lot of ways. And it really forced me to start thinking about, what does it mean? Why is it important for me to be a Black woman? Like, why is that important? Like, why is that identity important? So I started to really think about, doing different things on campus. So we wanted to do Black History Month programs, or just being in leadership positions, like being the captain of different teams, and facing some of the racism from the other students. A lot of it was just ignorance. They had not engaged. There's some racial slurs that were called, or just subtle things to let you know that you really weren't welcome there, or this was not, this wasn't made for you. And you realize it really, really early. And I remember my freshman year when it really dawned on me that it wasn't about intelligence, or whether the white students are more intelligent than the Black students, or vice versa. It really was about the access to resources. Because growing up in Newark, New Jersey, like say for example the high schools, we may have a football field, or there were playgrounds, but they were made with concrete. We went to a school in Washington, Connecticut, and it was a public school. We were there using their lacrosse field. And I was amazed at how many sports fields they had. And this was a public school. It wasn't my boarding school. Like, we went to borrow their facilities for the day. And I peeked in the window and saw this well-equipped computer lab that had so many computers. And I just remembered my old junior high school, we had like 4 DOS computers in the back of the room. They were just as dusty as they could be. And it really struck me that, wow, we don't have access to this. Like, children in Newark, New Jersey don't have access to these resources. And it impacts your ability to succeed. It impacts your life trajectory. And so for me, when I would come back to Newark from Washington, Connecticut, and I'm not saying many Black people, I would be like plastered to my father's car window. Like, oh my God, there's so many Black people. I see brown. And it made me fall in love, like, with just communities of color, just people. And I don't think I really appreciated the Black community until I was placed in that situation where I was no longer surrounded by it, about just the vibrancy that's there, the passion, the love that's there, despite the many obstacles that those types of communities, not those types, but just urban communities face, whether it's, employment, housing issues, educational resources just aren't there. There's still so much love, passion, brilliance, And that's what I love about Black culture.
So I have to ask this question. So was Black History Month celebrated there before your arrival?
No.
Okay.
We didn't have any Black faculty at the boarding school. There was one.
But they still could have
Latina.
celebrated it, though.
Well, they didn't celebrate it. And I, when it really made me think, why is this important? Because one day someone said, well, we're not going to put this together. She didn't think it's going to happen. And I started crying. And it made me think, like, why am I crying about them not having a Black History Month program? Like, why is it important for me that these students know something about Black culture? So there were some hard times. Sometimes I wanted to quit, but I'm glad that I didn't, because it really taught me that students can succeed regardless of your race, your national origin, your gender. You just have to have access to resources. And it taught me a lot.
Okay.
So it's a really tough question, and Oscar did circulate questions beforehand, so it's not a surprise question. But I think I still don't have a really proper response because there's so much to say about like the beauty of Black culture. I think about our creativity and our ingenuity. I've recently just kind of started listening to some Spanish artists, like from Spain, who actually kind of sing in Spanish, and so many of them kind of have hip-hop inflected like lyrics and vibes and moves. I think about kind of how hip-hop starts from like poor people, like, like in the Bronx and in New York, and how it's become a global phenomenon, so where folks who don't speak the same language or know the same spaces can still be familiar like with the ways that Black folks think and move and act and behave. And so I think we're just an incredible people in terms of our triumphs, our successes, beyond what's been done to us, what we've also done in terms of our own agency and collective abilities. And so I continue to be impressed and be amazed. And so it's really hard to respond to because there's so much to say and to think about, when I think about kind of Black culture. So I defer to Rasheda's response, which I think is much more eloquent.
They're both were really good. All right, so let's hear from you. Any questions, comments? Yes, Tiffany.
I'm sorry, I'm on the side. So my question is for everybody. In your experience, do you have productive tips for being in an environment that you feel you're the only one? Everyone is different from you. How should one? What have you learned that one should conduct themselves and be able to be happy and express themselves when you feel like you're the only one and everyone else is different?
So just in case, if everyone could hear the question was about perhaps some tips or some strategies you can use if you're the only one in the situation and how you should conduct yourself. So Keith's going to start that one.
So I think that's a really great question. When I got to Rutgers-Camden in 2008, I was the only African-American faculty member. That's not the case anymore, but we're still in the minority, right? And across the campus, right, faculty of color are greatly outnumbered, right, by other types of faculty members, right? So that's still the case. If you're literally the only one, and in terms of what I actually did, was to come to find allies. So even in a space where you're phenotypically, meaning the way you look, right, you're one of 20 or one of whatever the case is, you're going to find people, right, even within that number, right, who are more connected to your cause than you might think that they are. So you have to kind of actively go and search out and find those people who may not look like you or have your same background or even kind of, speak your language metaphorically or literally, right, but they know and want to help you, right? And then you kind of form a bond. And so, 2 or 3 against 100 are much better than 1, right? And so that's something which has worked for me. And I've found so many allies, both within my department and outside, people in this room who have helped me and I've helped them, and we've made it together. So ideally, we would go into a world where we'd be represented and we would see ourselves in our boardrooms and TVs and the White House, but we don't. So we have to kind of find people who are similarly minded and build together. So find allies, I think, is one crucial thing.
I agree wholeheartedly with Keith. And I think that there are some common threads that you will find with other people, regardless of their race, their nationality, their gender. And I remember specifically what comes to mind. I had a mentor when I first started practicing commercial litigation. There weren't many Black leaders at that firm. They had a lot of associates, which are like the entry level. But my mentor was a Jewish young man who had some family in New York, and we bonded over KRS-One. And I had no idea. We would kind of go over lyrics, and I'm like, what? Like, I just never, for whatever reason, my own, conception of who loves KRS-One. But you can just find those allies, like Keith said, and that will kind of help you continue to go forward and make sure that you're opening the door for others to come into that space as well, so that you continue to reach back to other people who can come into those spaces also.
I agree with them. They said it so lovingly, and I was just going to say you have to find your crew, right? So your crew can be a lot of different people. I will also suggest that you extend trust, right, on a test basis, because you don't have to be completely open and vulnerable when you enter these new places, right? You test the waters little by little. Like, you drop little things about who you are as a person. Like, you don't have to just be totally authentic day one, because you really want to test the waters to see, okay, how relaxed can I be in this environment? And that's a very important skill to develop over time, because authenticity is really good, but you have to get to a place where there's enough security and there's enough safety so that you can be authentic to who you are. So you have to test people's trust levels to see, how much can I share with you about myself. And sharing of yourself is a privilege, right? It's a privilege if I invite you into my life, right? So I may start talking about, here's some things that I did this weekend, right? And then see how people respond to that. They respond favorably. Okay, I may allow you to know a little bit more about me, right? So you tested it. If they don't respond favorably, then you can pull back a little bit, and okay, we may need more time, right? So it's not. So the research suggests that a lot of racial ethnic minorities are bicultural, right? Because you know your culture, but you also live, right, in a broader culture as well. So we tend to kind of be better able to test waters like that and kind of read rooms a lot better, right? So you just continue to use those skills when you are the only person in these new spaces to test those waters even more. Well, great question.
I have a question. It's pretty simple. So Eyes on the Prize was mentioned, and Eyes on the Prize was an amazing documentary that, to me, allowed us to feel the authenticity of the time of America, and also like you were able to feel the trauma, but also feel the triumph. And ever since that, I haven't found a documentary that really meets that, but it's so dated now that the closest that I found was Many Rivers to Cross, Lewis Gates Jr., I believe.
Lewis Gates.
Back in early 2010. But I wanted to know if you have any recommendations for any documentaries that are really substantial, really raw, but still done professionally. Because there are some, it's really hard to find, and I feel like it should be more well documented.
Right.
I haven't had that experience of finding one yet.
Good question. So I'm thinking, right? Go ahead, if you do.
Well,
I don't know of a holistic one, right? But I'm trying to think. I definitely know, like, there are some things that are specific genres that I really liked, right? So, like, Ava DuVernay's, documentary, 13th, like, that's a specific genre that I thought was just brilliantly done. But I'm trying to think of some other ones that would be more holistic in terms.
yeah, that was my thinking as well. So I was going to say the 13th, but that's very specific in terms of mass incarceration, or, Henry Louis Gates, again, kind of blacks in Latin America, which covers like blacks in Cuba and South America, but that's not the kind of,
Broad-based one.
John Hope Franklin kind of Slave with a Freedom type of scope you're talking about. It's a really good question. I'm not sure. I mean, there must be more out there, so that's something I have to think about.
Yeah. Do you? Yeah. Anybody? Do you think of someone else? Yeah.
What about Glory?
The movie Glory?
Yeah.
So that was Civil War one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's with Denzel Washington. That's a period one too. Thank you for that. That's a period one for Civil War, but
I know
Pat.
Gates have done something for PBS recently.
Right.
I think maybe even after the 2010 one.
2010.
That there was maybe a 4 or 5 part series.
4 or 5, okay.
That hosted. But I'd have to Google it.
And there was something that was on OWN recently, because I know Brittany Cooper was on that, and I forget the title of that, but it was, again, more for women, Black women and stuff. I think now they're doing just more specific genre ones as opposed to like a whole, like telling of a history. Because when you think about Ava DuVernay's Selma was really the first movie that really, showed Dr. Martin Luther King's life. He appears in a lot of other, civil rights movies, but that was really the first feature movie of his life. So I can't think of any other like full feature.
And without kind of knowing like a better response, I mean, what it makes me think of is the possibility that maybe there's also time then or space, right, for another kind of documentary, which is this kind of sweeping. I'm not sure if you're someone who actually kind of works on film or does film, but I think sometimes questions come out of a need, right? And so perhaps there's something to think about in terms of like having a kind of grand documentary which kind of does FM history in that kind of way. But I don't know personally, and there's probably some stuff out there I just don't know.
It's a great question. It could make me actually go back to my office and start searching.
Actually, I think I'm thinking of another restaurant.
Okay. Yeah. Any other questions? Pat?
You mentioned kind of structures, kind of being kind of seen in some of Stevenson's work, and then he kind of started talking about the lack of diversity amongst faculty on our campus. And recently that our student population is we kind of identified as a minority majority kind of proudly, but continue to kind of not see that change in the front of the classroom. And so, what do you think are some of those structural challenges preventing that? And do you think that students, some of us in the room work with students, can help kind of influence or encourage a change?
We definitely see the issue in the law school as well in terms of the faculty not being as diverse. But there's I understand there's now funding that will be targeted specifically for bringing in more diverse scholars. I think the other thing, honestly, structurally, is just the tenure structure that, in my opinion, insulates poor performers.
No, go ahead.
It insulates.
No judgment from here.
It insulates, and I think it almost creates an untouchable segment of your university campus. And unfortunately, they have those positions for life. I mean, fortunate for them. So I'm sure there's some, value in job security. But I do think you only have so many tenured slots, right? And so I think that's something that is a challenge, and I don't know how you can really combat that other than trying to bring in new professors, and eventually they'll be, given tenure. But when the faculty doesn't look diverse, I think it also is a deterrent for others to join.
I think in terms of, that was a great question about kind of the structural conditions that make it hard to have a more diverse faculty body. I think one issue is the pipeline. So for instance, Oscar and I, we sit on the CIED, which is the Chancellor's Committee on Institutional Equity and Diversity. And so we look at some of the numbers as it relates to particular disciplines. So for instance, in psychology, there just aren't, as many as should be, PhDs of color, in the pipeline. So for instance, psychology just had a search, for, faculty in a kind of particular area. And out of literally hundreds of candidates, there were only a handful of people of color within that pool, right? So when you end up with a result, which looks a certain way, the odds are literally stacked against you, right? So if you have 300 candidates and 4 are of color or of some underrepresented group, those 4 have to be really stellar to make it to the final cut, And the way that academic jobs work, you're only going to have about 3 or 4 people who are going to be invited to campus at the very end as it is. So structurally, I mean, that's a much harder hill to climb. So I think pipeline is one issue. I also think that in terms of Rutgers-Camden, I think that we have to also just simply kind of make diversity a priority. So if you say, well, we have a good candidate. Okay, well, what makes a good candidate? They can teach well, Okay, they can research well, Okay, they can do service or committee work well. But what about if you start to say, well, a criteria for being a professor here is that you're also able to mentor students of different backgrounds, right? That you have experiences in different communities, right? I mean, if we kind of make those things a priority and a criteria, then structurally who we think is good starts to change, right? So candidates who have certain skill sets, who have certain experiences, can start to rise to the top of the list. But we're not, again, to be clear, we wouldn't be lowering or diminishing our standards, right? We're making our standards more inclusive so that more people with different types of excellence, right, can come to the table. So I think structurally, right, those are the type of things that we could be doing and should be happening to kind of change that. So thanks for that question.
Good. Other questions? Yes?
All right, this question is open for anybody, but how do you feel about the movement Black Lives Matter and the injustice that you receive in the court system?
That was a great question, Issa. It's actually one of the questions that I've primed to them. So you asked the question for me. So how do you feel about the Black Lives Matter movement?
I think it's essential. I think that there are multifaceted approaches to addressing problems. I think protests and demonstrations, they've been effective prior to the civil rights movement, especially during the civil rights movement, and I still think there's a place for them now. Personally, when I looked at, like I was saying, like Eyes of the Prize, I saw that, but I also saw Thurgood Marshall and what he was able to do in terms of bringing litigation like Brown v. Board of Education and a lot of the other cases that were able to help change the law. So I think that there needs to be different actors that are, performing different, not skills, but performing different duties or have different responsibilities. So I think the Black Lives Matters movement is still essential, and I still think there's value in it. But I also think you need to have someone within the system that's going to be challenging that. I think you need to have more Black prosecutors, and that's something that we have seen an increase in recently. And most people think they don't want to be a prosecutor because they don't want to, be a part of that system. But the only way that we can actually change that system and maybe try to stem the tide or to have an unbiased view at some of the information that's coming in front of them is to have people in positions of authority. So I think that there's definitely room for multiple movements, so to speak.
And I agree. I think that Black Lives Matter as a movement is essential. I think we have to understand as well that Black Lives Matter is a continuing kind of evolution of the civil rights movement. The 19th century had something called the Negro Convention movement, where Black folks got together and decided like what our problems were and how to best solve them. So Black Lives Matter is really an extension of that continuing history of Black folks organizing themselves and trying to figure out how best can we move forward. I would also note that Black Lives Matter was founded by 3 women of color, right? Queer and queer allied, and oftentimes the Black Lives Matter movement has been co-opted by this need to kind of have Black men be the face, right, of anything when it comes to kind of people of color, right? And so we're celebrating Black History Month this month, but we're also honoring Black women in particular, and I wanted to kind of to note that point. The other thing I want to say really quickly is that I also get really ticked off when I hear folks say, but don't all lives matter, right? And you all are in the room, so you're probably not those people, but if you are, let me just clarify that. By saying that Black lives matter, doesn't mean that other lives can't matter as well. But when you come from a tradition and a system and a history that systematically, right, despises and denigrates Black folk, then you have to also kind of champion certain causes and in really kind of emphatic ways. So the statement Black Lives Matter is not about hate, it's about loving and taking care of like Black people, right? I don't imagine that in the middle of, Breast Cancer Awareness Month, somebody would say, well, what about feet, right? Like, we all understand that clearly we have to kind of attack particular problems with a certain level of energy and intention. So by saying Black Lives Matter, I'm saying that we love Black people and they're in bad shape, so let's love ourselves and lift each other up, right? So just to kind of clarify that, I think that folks well-intentioned will say, well, all lives matter, and of course all lives matter, but the point of the movement is not to denigrate any other group. It's to love, right? It's to have self-care, right, over and around, right, Black people.
Yep. I co-sign everything that you said.
So that's interesting that you brought up All Lives Matter. You were aware of Blue Lives Matter?
Mm-hmm.
So I always, when people say, because I kind of see, I don't really see how All Lives Matter has a strong argument
considering the fact that when people try to talk about it, there's like two things. There's people who literally mean all lives matter, and then there's just the people who are saying that to like debase the Black Lives Matter perspective. I think it would be interesting if Black Lives Matter were to more so challenge Blue Lives Matter instead of All Lives Matter. And I wanted to know your opinion on that perspective of Blue Lives Matter. Because I feel like it's like there's more of a foundation with that than All Lives Matter.
So if you didn't hear the question, I think it was about whether Black Lives Matter should take on the Blue Lives Matter.
More so focus on
More
that
focus.
argument than
Okay.
All Lives Matter.
Then All Lives Matter. Okay.
Sure.
That's deep.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. So here's one thing. So I was in a Christian bookstore a few months ago, and I picked up a Bible, and what struck me about it was that it had blue, it had the Blue Lives Matter symbol on it.
Right.
And I turned to open the Bible, and it said, this Bible was kind of dedicated to law enforcement, right? So I have several family members who are members of law enforcement, both active and retired, right? Clearly, like if something happens, right, I'm going to call the police, right? I support law enforcement in a kind of general way, right? But when we are kind of making an either-or argument and say it's either going to be Black Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter, right? That's where the problem arises. And so Black Lives Matter does not, again, exclude, right, supporting law enforcement, right? It simply says that we're going to value Black lives and we're going to hold police accountable, right, when they jack us up, right? When they pull us over, when they stop and frisk us, like we're going to hold police accountable for killing people without any type of, retribution or accountability, So I agree totally in terms of saying that Blue Lives Matter should not be, and the fact that they've taken the language of Black Lives Matter to make it Blue Lives Matter says that they're basically appropriating, right, what Black folks have done, right, to then make it about something else. And it's really distracting from what the real issue is. So I agree in terms of really challenging that. But unfortunately, when you say that we're going to challenge Blue Lives Matter, people say, well, you're not for law enforcement, you're not for police. And that's not the case. We're simply saying that that's not the issue. Like, that's actually a diversionary tactic, which is getting away from the problem that we started focusing on in the first place.
I agree wholeheartedly. And I think we all respect, well, for the most part, law enforcement officers, the humanity of like the human beings that are in those roles, but their job and their duty is to protect and to serve. And so if you have Black people that aren't being protected, that are doing no more than being in their houses playing video games and to be shot and killed by a police officer, you can't deny the data that's there, the facts that are there, and that's what the Black Lives Matters movement is focused on. So I do think it's a diversionary tactic to then try to pit the police against Black people. That's exactly what we don't want to happen. Like it's a community, and I respect police departments that are doing more to have like community communication, just engagement with one another. Because I'll give you guys a quick example. We did a panel discussion specifically about it was this police in the community and how can we improve those relations. And a lot of the information that was coming was, well, we need to warn, young Black men of what not to do when you're encountered by the police. And it has its role and it's vital. But I think we also need to say, well, what do police officers need to do and how should they be engaging and how can we counter the bias that's a part of our system here in this country? So it can't be a focus on just telling young Black men what they need to do, but there needs to be some accountability for the data and for the incidents that we constantly see reported. So I definitely agree with the fact that that's just a diversion and it is hateful and it kind of just continues that cycle of distrust and that you're my enemy as opposed to you being someone whose salary I'm paying to protect me and my family.
Well said. So we still have a little bit more time for more questions, but I wanted to ask you, Rhasheda, because you have a book there, so I want to give you opportunity to share with us your book and what it means to you, show and tell.
Thank you so much. I ordered it this week. It just actually preparing and starting to think about the questions that you shared with us, Oscar. And this year is the centennial anniversary of the Harlem Renaissance. And so this book, it's a beautiful book and I highly recommend getting it. It's literally not more than $35. It's I Too Sing America, which is from Langston Hughes' appointment, I Too America. And it has artwork, there's beautiful poetry in here. And this book, it reminded me of the fact that I don't read poetry as much as I used to. I was an English major in undergrad and loved reading creative stories, poems, and law school beat that out of me. I didn't want to read anymore beyond the case books. But this just kind of reignited just the love that I have for poetry, and I'll just briefly read the poem that actually starts the book by Langston Hughes, if I may.
Sure. Oh, absolutely.
I Too, Langston Hughes. This was published in 1926. I Too Sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes, but I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow, I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody'll dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America. And I think it just speaks to that, just the unity, that this is our nation. Each group plays a part in the beautiful fabric of our country. And so I highly recommend picking up this book. It's on Amazon. You can get it in 2 days with Amazon Prime. It's Will Haygood. But there are going to be activities throughout this year. There was actually the Dance Theater of Harlem is performing in Princeton this coming Saturday. But there are going to be events throughout the year that are celebrating the centennial anniversary of the Harlem Renaissance. That actually was started, at least in terms of history, says it was started by a group that was nicknamed the Harlem Hellraisers or Hell Fighters, and those soldiers were the first African American regiment to actually fight in World War I, and they lived abroad in France and were adored, were respected when they were there in France, and to come back to the United States and to be treated like less than, it helped to spark the Harlem Renaissance. So it's definitely a worthy read.
So I know I said I will let you ask a question, but I think we should just end on that poem and that note. Thank you for coming, and if you have not yet had the opportunity, please check out all the other Black History Month celebrations that we had this month. The committee put together a phenomenal program. Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Pat. And thank you, everyone, TiAira, everyone who serves on that committee. Please join me in thanking my guests, Rhasheda Douglas and Dr. Keith. Sorry.
I just wanted to correct myself again because I wasn't wrong. One that I was thinking of was the Gates one that said, Black America since MLK and still I rise.
Oh, yeah.
Is the last 50 years.
Right. I've seen that one too. That's fun. So please join me next month when we celebrate Women's History Month. Our very own Dr. Sarah, who's right there. She'll be our guest, as well as Dr. Mandela Watson. So thank you, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of Beyond the Mill.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Mill and for being a Diversity Matters subscriber. If you enjoyed the show and want to hear more, please post, talk about, and reshare our show with all of your friends and family. And leave us a favorable review so that it will make it easier for others to find us wherever they listen to podcasts. We cannot do this important work or keep it going without you, so we really appreciate your support. Beyond the Mill is produced by me, Oscar Holmes IV, and TiAira Neal, and receives generous support from Rutgers University-Camden's Office of Diversity Inclusion and Office of Student Affairs. Diversity Matters is produced by WH Consulting, a firm that provides a wide range of management consulting and professional services to individuals and organizations. Original music produced by Sincere Morton Murray. Until next time, peace and love.